Welcome to episode 138 of Rebirth Revolution. My name is Melissa Olson. I want to talk about a couple of different topics this week, but they do have a common thread. Let's start with the rush by legislators to give extra protection to the Supreme Court justices since a man showed up at Kavanaugh's house with weaponry. There is much hand-waving and upset about this, but it rings hollow with me. One of the principles that we have talked about is that when we elevate a person to a status higher than the rest of the public and grant them privileges that others do not possess, they quickly become out of touch with reality and go off the rails. I don't understand how this case, which did not result in any sort of injury or death, is one that requires immediate attention when little children are being gunned down in their classrooms, and that doesn't cause anywhere near the same concern for some people. Obviously, I would wish freedom from the fear of being shot and or murdered for everyone. But do we really want those who are allowed to make the laws that the rest of us have to live by? Do we want them to live in a completely separate world than the rest of us? Should they not have to deal with the same active shooter drills that the smallest of school children have had to endure for years now? Shouldn't they have to look over their shoulders like the rest of us do? Don't they need to know the reality that comes with the decisions that they make? To remove them from the reality that the rest of us have to abide is to allow them to not understand the gravity of the decisions that they make that exacerbate this problem. It moves the issue from a place where you would have to think of the very predictable outcomes to the issue just being theoretical. It is believed that they will rule in the very near future to expand the protections of the Second Amendment, making it easier to carry guns without restrictions. But is it fair that they live in a protective bubble that will make that decision potentially dangerous for all of us and none of them? To function as a just and fair society, we all need to be living in the same world. We need to enjoy the same protections and shoulder the same responsibilities. We do those who make the final rulings no favors by allowing them to live in an artificial world, one without consequence. Their lives, no matter what their jobs are of no greater value than the lives of any of the children who have died because of our country's gun obsession. I watched the documentary Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey on Netflix this week. Wowza. It is easy to watch a story about a fundamentalist cult and think that it has nothing to do with you and your life, but nothing could be further from the truth. This particular fundamentalist Mormon church has been ruled by a father and then his son from the Jeffs family since 1986. It is still operational. It is a sect that is an offshoot of the Mormon Church. They split off because they still believe in men having multiple wives and teach that the more wives and children you have, the holier you become. We have talked on many occasions about red flags in religions. One of this sect's beliefs should set off all the bells and whistles. They believe that they are the one and only true people of God's on the whole face of the earth. If anyone tries to sell you that sort of mess, you need to run in the opposite direction. If in fact the Creator put close to 8 billion people on this planet and really only believed in a sliver of a fraction of a percentage of those people, then that would be beyond sadistic. If out of almost 8 billion people, only 10,000 of those people are the true people of God, then what is the point of this whole thing? It makes no sense. This type of talk is always an appeal to the human frailty of needing to feel special. Everyone, at their core, struggles with the immature notion that they want to be the special one. But we are all of equal value, all 8 billion of us. We are all in the same system, and we are all working with the same limitations and challenges. We are all striving to reach greater understanding, and this sort of promise is ridiculous, cruel, and destructive. Any religion that doesn't recognize the importance of all people is waving a huge red flag. Another grievous error is that they appoint one man to be what they call the prophet. That man is not to ever be questioned, no matter what he demands. The prophet supposedly speaks for God. One of the selling points of following the prophet is that he is supposedly immortal, which is quickly glossed over when the prophet does, in fact, die and his son takes over. So much for immortality. As with every single situation where a man is given unfettered power, this results in a man having complete control over the women, and particularly young women. The prophet is the only one who can arrange marriages, and those turn out to be marriages like the 85-year-old prophet marrying a 19-year-old. As if that isn't sick and disgusting enough, the whole scheme devolves, as they always do, to the older men marrying underage women. The whole series is really disturbing, and it would be easy to decide that it is just another aberration that exists in our culture. But it is important to understand because so many of the decisions that are made in this awful subculture mirror some of the decisions that are being suggested and implemented in our larger culture right now. Fundamentalism, no matter what religion you are talking about, seems to have the same game plan when it comes to women and children. In this particular sect, women are powerless over their own lives. They are told who they must marry, what they must wear, and how they are to contribute. Surprise, surprise, they are all basically relegated to being broodmares for the men. The title of the documentary comes from the songs that they are taught that are designed to explain their place in the order. They are to keep sweet. They are to obey. To be granted salvation and eternal life, they must obey all commands of the man in charge. Of course, everybody there already has eternal life, as we all do. They are working to get something that they already possess. But they have been convinced, since they were babies, that they can only get that through pleasing the prophet. To keep this horrific system in place, they banned books and heavily monitored any and all input that anyone could get from the outside world. They could only be taught, indoctrinated with information that served the purposes of the prophet. Think about this when you see people screaming at school board meetings. And think about this as libraries are being stripped of books that do not reflect the fundamentalist view of the world. Think about this when it becomes illegal to say the word gay. The prophet, Warren Jeffs, made himself omnipotent. He took all the businesses, controlled all the money, and everyone worked for free. The men who did his bidding were gifted with underage girls who were willingly given to them by these girls' parents. It all devolves, as it always does, into paranoia and tighter control over the members. It's all classic cult stuff. They always begin with some supposed connection to the Creator and end up with things like child rape, which could not be any further from what the Creator would want. But the underlying tactics for achieving this fundamentalist nirvana for a handful of men are the exact same ones that we're having to fight against today. The efforts to subjugate women, stripping them of bodily autonomy, and reverting them back into the slaves of men, are all employing the same techniques. They're working from the same playbook. The vision of a world where only a handful of old white men control everyone else is a fundamentalist wet dream. All of these ideologies rely on first controlling women and children. Pay attention to that when you see it. I highly recommend watching Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey. It's a tough watch, but it is important to see the connections between that world and the one we are trying to fight our way out of right this very moment. It's a tough fight because we see how susceptible some people are to falling for self-appointed prophets. They are willing to anoint these frauds with infallibility, immortality, and they are willing to lose everything to win their favor. Just look at those who are willing to die for our previous president. It's the same thing. They want to belong. They want to be special. And those weaknesses in them will predictably send them down some very dark paths. The more we study how these things happen, the greater our chances of keeping them from happening to us all. Thanks for returning for another week of Rebirth Revolution. We can be found on all the podcast apps, the music apps, on Audible, and full episodes can be found on our YouTube and Facebook pages. Please rate, subscribe, download, and share whenever possible. Until next week, divest yourself of prophets, especially if they have no accountability. Make your own choices, the ones led by your own honesty and integrity. Stick with your COVID precautions and stay out of cults. Remember, you're loved exactly as much as every other person on the planet, not 1 ounce more or 1 ounce less. Stay strong and safe and independent.